did choose you. But not for the reasons you think. Your assumption that the Klingons were waiting in ambush at the binary stars was predictive. You chose to do the right thing over and above what was sanctioned. Even at great cost to yourself.
I thought Klingons were honorable.
As if you understand honor.
So, Harcourt, Fenton, Mudd. The USS Discovery is yours.
As am I. You win.
Don't try and con a con man.
You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek Discovery, brought to you by the StarQuest Podcast Network and our many generous supporters. Hi, I'm Don Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek Discovery, where we discuss the deeper layers and meaning in the hit new show, Star Trek Discovery. Today we're discussing the first half season of the show, and joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Cory Sticha. Hi, Father Cory.
How's it going?
Good. So I want to start this with a disclaimer, content warning, however you want to put it. Star Trek Discovery contains some mature content related to matters, mostly matters of a sexual nature, although it also has a lot of violence and stuff. But talking about violence is not necessarily going to trigger anyone. But we'll be discussing those mature content, as we do all content from a Catholic perspective, because we are all three of us are Catholics, and from a Catholic moral perspective. If the discussion of matters of a sexual nature as they appear in the show is something you don't want to listen to in front of children, probably not. You probably should listen to the show first, or just not listen to it around kids. We're not going to get explicit, of course, but and we're not going to drop the F-bomb for the first time in a StarQuest SQPN podcast ever, like Star Trek did. So we'll, but just I want to put that out there up front so we don't surprise anyone when we start talking about some of the aspects of the show that make it different from others. Star Trek returns in a way, or not just in a way, but so let's kind of just talk about the idea of Star Trek returning to the small screen. It's been, since Enterprise, I think it's been over a decade, 12 years. I didn't look up the number, the date of Enterprise, 2005. So it's been a dozen years since we've had Star Trek on TV, and it's now been even longer than that since we've had Star Trek that takes place after the events of Star Trek Voyager.
Sure.
So what do you think? I mean, about the return of Star Trek? What were your hopes and dreams and impressions when you first heard about it? Jimmy, let's start with you.
I've been a fan of Star Trek ever since I was a little kid, and so I was disappointed that it was off the air for so long. I thought that I understood why it went off the air, because we'd achieved a kind of saturation point ever since, we had Next Gen and Deep Space Nine, and then Voyager took a big step down in the writing, and Enterprise was uneven in the writing. It was finally catching its stride when it got canceled, but we just had so much Star Trek for so many years that ratings were down, people were burned out on it, and the series, even though I would have liked to see Enterprise go on longer, the series was hitting a point where it needed a rest to let, kind of people reset before the franchise comes back. So I was disappointed that it's been this long. I was excited, and I don't know if that's the right word, but I was intrigued and pleased when I heard that there was going to be a new Star Trek series. I was concerned because I'd seen how the producers of Star Trek had made really big missteps previously with other series. Voyager and Enterprise both, I think, had big missteps on the conceptual level that prevented them from being successful as series. And so I was concerned about what would this new series be. I was also concerned how would it relate to the J.J. Abrams movies, which I'm not a fan of. They don't feel like Star Trek to me. They feel like Star Wars wrapped in a Star Trek skin. And so I was apprehensive, and that was my basic initial reaction. I also was concerned that the series was announced not for television, but for this new CBS All Access digital platform, which guaranteed that a lot of people would not be seeing it.
How about you, Father Cory? What was your initial reaction, and also the fact that it was going to take place before the events, between Enterprise and the original series?
That was one of my big concerns, is they were constraining themselves. 10 years. It's supposedly Discovery is 10 years before the original series. Now, I don't mean constraining themselves as far as a technical level. I know there were some fans that were upset because the Discovery looks far more advanced than the USS Enterprise.
No more mini skirts and bouffant hairdos and colorful unlabeled buttons.
Yeah, exactly. And that's neither here nor there. I mean, that they were operating under the technical constraints and what they thought looked high tech in 1963 or 66. Sorry, I was thinking Doctor Who was 63.
Doctor Who.
But 67, they're operating what they thought looked like high tech then. And they were operating with the best of technology as far as special effects and everything like that at the time the original series came out. We've got far better technology. We've got, our low technology looks more high tech than the original series did.
And we've even seen redesigns. I mean, when Star Trek The Motion Picture came out, we had a big visual jump in terms of the set design and the special effects and the Klingons. The makeup effects for them totally changed and improved.
Yeah.
Let's get to the Klingons separately. I want to deal with them on a separate basis.
That is kind of an issue. So, I mean, there's all this history of the series, of the lore of Star Trek. There's so much there that I was really afraid, again, looking at the Enterprise, the series Enterprise, they kind of fell into that trap as well. And they tried to redeem themselves by having the mirror universe episode where they get a Constitution class cruiser that it looks like the original Enterprise set. And it's very discordant, because you've got the, NX-01 Enterprise, which looks much more modern by our view. And then it's a step back to what looked futuristic in the 60s. So I was kind of afraid that wasn't so much a concern for me. Actually, I'm kind of glad that they just did away with that, which is saying, we're going to make it look like the original series. That I'm not so concerned about. I was more worried about how is it going to fit in with the lore of Star Trek. And I think they've been making conscious efforts to do that. But we'll talk about some of the stuff we'll talk about with the series. There's still a lot of question marks there.
Yeah, but it actually ties into a lot of Star Trek lore, I mean, in really big and little ways.
Yeah, there's one point where they just kind of do an explicit drop into the lore where they say, we're talking. I think we can kind of go into this since we're talking about it.
Spoiler warning, everybody. We're reviewing the first 9 episodes or the first half season. So spoilers ahoy.
If you're worried about spoilers, turn off the series now, or turn off this podcast now. Where the Michael Burnham is running with her roommate and going over what her roommate's future plans needs to be, how she needs to become a captain of a starship. It just happens to say, and you'll become a first officer on a Constitution class ship like the Enterprise, and then goes on. Saying that the Constitution class exists at this time, 10 years before the series, and that the Enterprise exists at this time, 10 years before the original series.
And another point they mentioned...
Its captain would have been Robert April at this point.
Right.
Or Christopher Pike, one.
At another point, Harry Mudd, a character who they bring from classic Star Trek, the original series, gets a list from the computer of the best captains of the Starfleet at the time, and it's all Robert April, Captain Chris Picard, Pike. And there was one other one.
It mentions Archer.
Right, and then. The Captain Giorgio, who as we see in the first pilot episode.
Actually, it's Saru who does that.
Oh, right. That's when he was trying to
temporarily captain.
Right.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, when I heard about it, I was excited and concerned. Excited by the fact that we were going to get new Star Trek as a TV series. The fact is that from a business perspective, CBS owns Star Trek on TV. Paramount owns Star Trek as movies, and they're separate businesses. So they can't really cover the same ground, and so you're not going to see crossovers of
Chris Pine or
I mean, the one we'd likely see would be the guy Zach Quinto as Spock because of the relationship with Michael Burnham. It would be nice to kind of see that, but I don't know that we're going to get a chance to. So, but there was a separation, and then there was a lot of controversy behind the scenes. There was upheaval in the showrunners, and then this guy who had been involved in Star Trek before, and then he left, and then there was all this question about why
and the initial buzz because of all that turmoil was bad.
Yes.
That it looked like the series was going to be a disaster. When they started releasing visual designs of what the Discovery looked like initially, they changed it, but a little bit they changed it. But when the initial design for the Discovery was revealed, it was widely panned by fans.
Right. And worse,
when the initial design for the Klingons was revealed, it was even worse for the fans.
And there must have been extensive reshoots as well, because the show was originally supposed to premiere this past January 2017. Then they pushed it back to May of 2017, and it finally didn't hit the screen until September of 2017. So it had a rocky beginning, and like you said, Jimmy, it's this streaming versus broadcast question, and I'd like to kind of jump into that a little bit here, because the danger of broadcast from the show's perspective is of streaming is that if enough people don't sign up to spend another, what is it, $7 a month? I think it is.
Yeah, something like that.
7 or 8 or something like that.
Yet another $7 or $8 a month that we have to pay to another streaming service to get the shows we want. That it may hurt the show's future. And where it's not on broadcast, except for the first episode, if it's on broadcast, it's got a much wider audience, and it's just makes you worried for the future.
Well, and this is not unheard of in Star Trek. Wasn't it Voyager that started the UPN network? Of course, you've heard of that one, right? It doesn't exist anymore.
And well, yeah. Also, this is a recurring theme with Star Trek. And after the original series, there was a planned reboot with the original cast called Star Trek Phase 2 that was going to launch a new TV network, which then never happened. And then Next Gen broke ground as a syndicated show, which was a new concept at the time. First run syndication had not really been a thing before. And then you had Voyager launch a network, and now you have this launching the equivalent of a network, because broadcast, I mean, the case for this is broadcast is going away or changing radically. Online is where the future is, and networks are experimenting to try to figure out how they can best leverage that, and creating their own platform rather than going with an existing platform like Hulu or Amazon or Netflix, is a way that networks kind of actually need to experiment with just to find out what shakes out in the end. But that does put the series at risk. Fortunately for fans of Star Trek Discovery, if you're a fan, which you may be if you're listening to this podcast, it has been picked up for a second season. And not just the second half of the first season that's beginning in January, but a whole entire second season.
Right. That's good news.
One thing I want to be clear about, we've kind of, mentioning this CBS All Access that they're putting it on. It's actually been around for about 3 years.
Yeah.
It was not, Discovery is not like the launch series. It is the big push to get people onto CBS All Access.
It's the highest profile CBS Access only show. Put it that way. Yeah. So I don't want to go too much into that. And of course, international viewers are who happen to be Netflix subscribers are in the best case, because they're getting it as part of their Netflix subscription. They don't have to pay extra, which is nice for our friends who are in the Netherlands, say.
Yeah, exactly.
So enough of the business aspect. Let's talk about the show itself. And we talked a little about the technology. I want to come back to that, but let's talk about the characters. Michael Burnham is the lead character. She's obviously the focus point character, the viewpoint character, and she's very different for Star Trek because she's a criminal. She mutinied against her captain, with good cause apparently, because she was trying to prevent this war with the Klingons from starting. But she went about it the wrong way, and she mutinied, and she caused her ship to be lost, her captain to be killed. And
I don't know that she did go about it the wrong way. I think events just took a course that was unfortunate.
Right. Well, and
if Captain Giorgio had listened to her right from the beginning, preventing the mutiny and given the Vulcan hello, then we might have avoided the war.
There's a good case to make for that. Okay, I'll go with that. She seems to have accepted her role and her fate. She doesn't apologize. She doesn't make excuses for her crimes. And on her way to life in prison as the first mutineer ever in the history of Starfleet,
that's implausible.
Yeah, she's
exactly.
This given this stuff that we saw in Enterprise, I don't know if I can buy that. She's intercepted by the ship Discovery and its captain, who takes her, from her path to prison and puts her to work for him as a specialist, given her specialized knowledge and abilities, because she's apparently was raised by Sarek and his wife Amanda, his human wife Amanda, as a not stepsister because they're not really blood related,
stepchild.
Well, they're not really blood related,
adopted
but
child.
Adopted brother and sister, or foster sister in a sense. She was sort of fostered as an orphan. To me, I have a hard time with that, just because it's a little on the nose, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
it's a little.
It's a little. Everybody is related to famous people. How plausible is that? Exactly.
It's not just any Vulcan. It's Sarek of Vulcan, and she's this human. And the fact is, of course, we Spock has never in all of Star Trek talked about having a human foster sister.
Right.
And of course he
just like he never talked about having an emotional Vulcan brother before Star Trek V.
Oh, Cybok. Right. That's one messed up family.
Well, but as we see in one episode at the Vulcan, whatever it is, one of the Vulcans points out to Sarek he has a history of these experiments.
That's true.
And he married a human woman, and so if he has these history of experimenting with humans and emotions, and if anybody on Vulcan is going to have a human foster child, Sarek would probably be one of the few that would be willing to do it.
It's an interesting idea, and I'm not sure why. Yeah, but anyway, why Vulcans took her and whatever. But what it results is that Burnham is very much emotionally restrained. She's very much
stunted.
Yes, that's another way to put it. But it makes her character interesting in that she has trouble with relationships, and in some ways she's almost autistic, or on the spectrum in that sense, because her social skills aren't there, which is an interesting choice by the producers. Because given the audience, there's a lot of fans who identify as on the spectrum. I don't think that's speaking out of turn at all. I know a lot of folks who said that.
And all the way back to the original series, Spock is the ultimate loner.
Yes. And emotionally unavailable sort of
and
character.
Cerebral, and Incidentally, all of the characters, just kind of a meta level comment about the characters on this show, they're all broken.
Yes.
In one degree or another. We don't have the next gen phenomenon where everyone is perfect and everyone is squeaky clean.
Right.
This is very much the opposite of that. And in that respect, it's in the mold of Deep Space Nine.
Yes.
Because you had the pervasive character brokenness on Deep Space Nine. And that was one of the things that made Deep Space Nine the best Star Trek series
Agreed.
So far.
I'm in agreement with that.
Because it creates vastly more dramatic potential and emotion than if everyone is perfect and squeaky clean. And I find it refreshing.
I would point out that Picard became a much more interesting character when he had some of that brokenness from being turned into lore and some of those other aspects.
The Borg.
Yes. Yep. Not lore, but
Borg.
Yeah,
Locutus.
he was Locutus. Ugh, I got all these facts in my head. Now, you make an interesting point about everybody being broken, because it makes this sort of it makes it different from other Star Trek in two ways, which is it's much more a one character viewpoint story than it is an ensemble. We're used to Star Trek being much more of an ensemble. It also makes it very dark. This is the darkest Star Trek of all. I mean, previously it was Deep Space Nine because of the war, but this goes well beyond that.
This is Battlestar Galactica level almost, not quite, but almost.
Yes.
Although the gore and violence is raised up a level because it's not broadcast TV, and there's also a bit of language and sexuality, as we said at the top of the show. But yes, the darkness is ramped up.
The feel that I get for this show is operatic. It's like an opera tragedy that you're watching, not a comic opera, but a tragic opera.
Yeah, and in fact,
I really get the vibe that a lot of these characters are not going to come out of this in a good position.
Right.
Whether Michael Burnham does in the end, I don't know. She may, but like Captain Lorca, if he survives at all, he is like going to do serious jail time.
Well, right. I was just going to go into that because he is the unethical captain that the most unethical was like Avery Brooks, Cisco.
Cisco.
He crossed the line a few times. Famously, there was this one episode, the famous episode where
Pale Moonlight.
In the Pale Moonlight, which was one of the best episodes of Star Trek. I think it's one of my favorites of all time. He crossed the line, but Lorca, he lives on the other side of the line. I mean, he is. Yeah. He's in some ways, he's almost a bad guy in this.
Really? I mean, he is. Yeah, he's definitely the most broken captain ever. And just to give a kind of summary, I'm assuming everyone has seen these episodes if you're listening or you don't care about spoilers. But he's initially presented to us as a guy who is hyper focused on winning the war with the Klingons, and he will do anything to accomplish that. But he has this view of himself that he's essential to winning the war on the Klingons. So he cannot step away from command of the Discovery. And when his command of the Discovery is threatened, he first lies to and then seduces his superior officer. And then when his superior officer decides to take command away from him anyway, he then deliberately places her in a situation where she's going to get kidnapped and possibly killed, and then refuses to go rescue her. And so he's doing a Uriah the Hittite on her. He's setting her up to be killed. And this is just completely off the scale for Starfleet captain behavior.
Yeah, it's and in some ways I find it makes it interesting in the sense this is
fascinating.
so different from, but it doesn't feel like Star Trek to me, and that's really the fundamental question at the heart of this. On the one hand, I think it's good science fiction, but on the other hand, it doesn't feel like Star Trek to me. And I think a lot of fans are grappling with this idea. It's dark. It's these characters. There's some of them I don't like them at all very much, and yet it doesn't feel like Star Trek. But it feels like good science fiction. I mean,
the reaction I heard, and I really agree with, was after the first two-parter aired. Well, it aired the first episode, and then you could go online and watch the second episode right away. This would be an incredible science fiction show on its own. If this was not in the Star Trek universe, this would be an incredible science fiction episode. This is an episode that would fit with Battlestar Galactica universe very well. But as far as a Star Trek series, there's a lot of people who are very upset with it for that, and myself included.
So let me make the case for why it's okay for Star Trek to go in this direction. at least on the thematic level. I'm not talking about individual choices that they make in the series. Star Trek, let me draw a point of comparison with Star Wars. The movies in Star Wars that focus on the Skywalker family, the numbered movies, all have a very similar feel and a very similar formula. Some of them are better than others, notably episodes 4 and 5. Some are really bad, like episode 1. But they all have certain common thematic elements. You've got Skywalkers, you've got the Force, you've got light and dark, you've got lightsabers, you've got dogfights in space, you have all of these common elements. And the producers have a problem. How do you recycle those formulas endlessly without them getting boring? What the producers of the Star Wars universe, Kathleen Kennedy and her group, realized in the post-George Lucas era is they need to find ways to expand the emotional range of the Star Wars universe to keep it from just getting totally stale. And the way they chose to do that is by creating these branch-off movies, the one-shots like Rogue One, which is by far the darkest thing we've seen in the Star Wars universe. It has a much more realistic feel, and it was a great movie. Yeah. And I think that's essentially what the producers of Star Trek are trying to do, because if they just brought back something that felt like Next Gen, or felt like Deep Space Nine, or felt like Voyager or Enterprise, it would be, oh, ho-hum, we've seen this and done this, got the T-shirt. What they need to do, like Star Wars, is find other places in the Star Trek universe that have different emotional feels, so it doesn't all feel the same to us, and we don't have that franchise fatigue just come roaring back at us.
And I agree with you, and that's why I specifically put my comments to the first 2 episodes. I was not a fan of the first 2 episodes at all. As I'm thinking about it, I almost feel like they should have started with the 3rd episode and did flashbacks to what got her into jail.
And that would have been a possibility. Yeah, they could have been an interesting big reveal at some point.
Because I think as the series went on, that Star Trek feel came back. But like you said, not in a formulaic way. Well, but it fits so much more, in my opinion, fits so much more into the Star Trek universe after the 2nd episode. Again, this is just my opinion.
When you think about it, I mean, the fact is the first 2 episodes of Star Trek Discovery have no Discovery. There's no Starship Discovery in those.
They're really their own mini prequel series.
And in fact, maybe that's what they should have done is separated it in time, and played those, at some other point. I don't know. Maybe that's above my pay grade, but I agree that those first 2 episodes, I mean, there were aspects of them I enjoyed. I liked parts of them, but it felt so foreign, so alien, and yet all of the marketing focused on those episodes. So, if you had only watched that, you would have thought that Captain Giorgio and Takuvma were going to be major parts of this series going forward, and you had no sense of Captain Lorca or any of the other characters who are only on Discovery. And so there was a sort of it was a disconcerting moment when those first 2 episodes ended, and it's like, what am I like? Is this the same? Is this what it's going to be? Right. It was very strange, and I think they were trying to preserve the surprise of Burnham being court-martialed and sentenced to prison, and that our main character is not the heroic Enterprise officer. It's this lowly prisoner, mutineer.
Right. They totally subvert expectations because we would expect, Burnham to have this dramatic last-minute reversal at the end of that, of her opening story. And nope, it doesn't happen. Her captain dies. She's a mutineer, and she goes to prison for the rest of her life.
Not just does she not have a reversal, she doubles down on it, and it leads to the death of her captain and the ship.
And a war.
Right.
And a war, yeah.
So I want to take plenty of time so we can talk about the Klingons and the interesting choices they made with the Klingons. So the big problem was in the original series, the Klingons were swarthy looking human beings. Essentially, they looked like they were maybe from Eastern Europe or something. They weren't all that alien, but they had
for all the like Klingons you saw in the background, they had like a makeup budget of between $2 and $3.
Right. They had bushy eyebrows and a big and a goatee because goatees are evil apparently.
And some face paint.
Right. And then, in the opening scenes of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, famously, you're like, who are these guys who are speaking in this strange language, and they have these head bumps and all this rubber mask makeup, and these are Klingons, and for years, and then the Next Generation came along with Worf, and no explanation until years later we get some vague, there was some sort of disease, and in fact there was a novelization, I think it was a few years ago that kind of actually explained the whole thing.
Oh, actually, it was explained. So in Deep Space Nine, we had a kind of non-answer from Worf where he said we don't talk about it.
Right.
But then in Enterprise, they did a story arc where it was revealed that the human-looking Klingons had been affected by a genetically engineered plague that was designed to take DNA from augmented humans of the Khan, Noonien, Singh variety and improve Klingons, but then it went out of control and made them all look human for a while until they got a cure.
Okay, so that explains why, for example, Kang and Kor looked human in the original series and then were a Klingon.
Previous speculations had been that, well, maybe there's two races of Klingons, but then that theory got dashed by the appearance of characters who now looked different.
Okay.
Really, they didn't need to do that because it's just a makeup upgrade, guys. Don't worry about it.
Right.
It's really just a show. I should really just relax.
The same thing is, the difference between, the Enterprise from the 60s and Discovery from today.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Just roll with it. Right.
It's just not a big deal. But they did come up with a kind of fun explanation, and the line with Worf is funny. So,
and that's a great episode. The Tribbles episode of DS9 is a fantastic episode, and that's just kind of we don't talk about it.
But so now this series now undermines all that, because now we've got these Klingons who look neither like the Klingons of Next Gen era or the Klingons of the original series era. There's something different.
They may eventually now they could explain it as, okay, this is some other race or group of Klingons. They don't all have to look the same, just like Federation people don't all have to look the same. But the problem is they've shown us members of multiple Klingon houses.
Yeah.
And they all have this different design.
Yeah.
If it were a pleasing different design, I could just say, okay, makeup change, no big deal.
Right.
But it's not a pleasing design, and that's the problem. It looks ugly. It doesn't correspond to what we've accepted in the past, and that's a trade down rather than a trade up or a trade sideways.
And it also affects the performance of the actors. I think the performances are wooden, and frankly, if finally in the last episode of the first half of the season, they get the universal translator out, and so we no longer have to hear this labored enunciation of Klingon. I mean, it takes forever for the actors to say a line, and it just was. It was torment, because then you have to read it on the screen anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, their body motions are, because they're in these big stiff plastic suits. They look as like these guys are not super warriors.
Right.
They're stiff, lumbering, almost zombie-like.
Right. It's not. I don't think it's a successful change, and I don't feel like I've ever gotten a satisfactory explanation from anyone involved in the series for why they felt it was necessary. Except it's our new thing, and we're gonna put our stamp on it. They didn't change the Vulcans, which thank God they didn't change the Vulcans. Yeah. They didn't change other things, but they felt like they had to change the Klingons, and it just bothers me that it shows a particular mindset. That's that of we're going to mess with things.
You do want, if you're creating a series, I mean, you do need to differentiate it from what's come before so that it feels different. And it's just a question of how far do you go with that? And sometimes creators go too far, or if not too far, they botch it. And I think that's what happened here. I wouldn't have minded a makeup change if it were a lateral trade or an improvement, but it wasn't. It was a step down.
Right. So, and then we have the Klingon War. And this Klingon War is something that had been brought up in classic Trek. In fact, all the way back to the original series. It's a war that involved Captain Icarus.
Garth of Izar was in it.
That's right, Izar. It was, Icarus was my memory prompt. Garth of Izar, and a little side note. There was this attempt to make a fan film called Axanar. About the Battle of Axinar by professional actors that you've seen in Star Trek and in other science fiction series, and it looked really good. It looked awesome, and it was going to be really good. It was going to take place during this time period, and they raised millions of dollars through Kickstarter to produce this, and Paramount sued them, and
it was CBS.
It was It was CBS, I suppose. It was CBS, and the result was this decision that these new guidelines for fan films, that they can be no longer than 15 minutes, they cannot cover certain things, and all this other stuff, which
can't use actors from the series.
Right. It just really undermines the whole project and undermines all the great. I mean, there were a lot. I mean, great might be a little much, but there were a lot of there were a lot of fun fan films that were well done for a fan film out there. These guys up in upstate New York who built an Enterprise on a soundstage, the original series Enterprise. I mean, it looks amazing from a fan perspective.
That Star Trek Continues for people who may want to look that up.
That's right.
They just finished it up, and I thought it was an excellently done series.
Yeah,
they had to cut it short though because of this.
Right, for what for the level of production value that they can reach, it was pretty well done. So that's sort of the backstory of this.
It was so well done actually that when Star Trek Enterprise needed prop elements and set elements from a Constitution class ship, they got them from the Star Trek Continues people who had rebuilt them.
That's right. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So that's sort of the backstory of that, like this of the like so the why we so Discovery covers this Klingon War. I don't know if there's much to say about it. I mean, Star Trek at War. We've seen it in Deep Space Nine.
I would say this about it. I don't get as much of a sense of the war as I did with Deep Space Nine. In Deep Space Nine, we saw a bunch of episodes, and it was a much longer thing. It went on for a few years, but we saw different sites in the war. We went to these places. We felt the troop movements and the ships and the fleets and the convoys and everything. And I felt much more engaged in the war. Whereas on Discovery, it feels like there's a war going on, but it's somewhere away from here, and we just kind of are hopping around its edges on the Discovery.
Yeah.
Right, and you hear the Discovery did this and Discovery did that, but we don't actually see it on screen what the Discovery is actually doing to affect the war.
Right.
Or other ships. We don't see people dying. We don't, see troops being shot, on a battlefield. We don't see anything like that.
Right. We had one episode, the 8th episode, Si Vis Pacem Parabellum, where they can't prevent the destruction of another Federation ship under attack. So there's that, but just the whole idea of this, that the series focuses on war, is another element where I feel like it gets away from Star Trek. And this was a criticism of Deep Space Nine. I don't think it was valid there, but Star Trek is about discovery. It's about exploration. You hear some of the characters at times talking about, well, I entered Starfleet to be a scientist and to discover things, and whenever they get the chance to explore something in the midst of their missions, they do. But I feel like It doesn't feel like that right now.
It doesn't, but then that was always the least plausible element of the original Star Trek concept, that we're explorers, not military men. Of course you're military men. That's why you have ranks and phasers and, you're part of a military. This is not an exploration service, civilian exploration service you're part of. And we've always heard about wars and such taking place in the Star Trek universe, like this one. In fact, we heard about this war before. So I think it's legitimate for Star Trek to say, okay, let's look at this part of established Star Trek history.
Right. That was certainly a big part of the Next Gen idea. It also, Next Gen was also where they tried to advance the idea that the future was beyond poverty and beyond economics and all these other things, which then just get totally blown out of the water by Voyager and Deep Space Nine especially.
It's like Vulcans don't have emotions. Nobody believes that.
Yeah.
Well, it is interesting, kind of the irony of a ship called Discovery that's a ship of war.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, there is a bit of that. So let's talk about the Discovery itself, the ship. I like the tech. I think some of the high-tech imaginings of like the holographic virtual reality controls and some of that stuff I enjoy. I've always been really into the tech of Star Trek. In fact, years ago, I got a book called The Star Trek Technical Manual by Franz Joseph, who is one of the original production designers of the original series. We
all three probably had that.
Yeah. Well,
not me, but
I
read
it. I got it through the science fiction book club for you get 10 books for a penny.
And then they jacked up the price.
Well, years ago, I looked it up on one of these what are things worth collectibles thing, and it was like $75, and I'm like, wow. Of course, I'll never sell it because it's just awesome. I still love that. So I love the tech. They've got the transporters and they've got, the shuttles. It's interesting. They've got this, the key here to the Discovery and what makes it special is the spore drive.
Yeah. And this is a big, for Star Trek purists, this was another big challenge because if the spore drive really worked in the long term, it would undo the rest of Star Trek history. Right. Because they'd just be able to teleport wherever they want in the universe. So that upset a bunch of people. But from my perspective, it's like, guys, yes, they are introducing a magical new technology we've never heard of before, but it's not going to last. No. There's going to be some crucial flaw that prevents this from being installed on every ship. And that's part of the drama. We've got this new tool, but what's the price? Which
we've actually probably, we might have seen at the very end of the fall finale that we just saw, Into the Forest I Go, where the ship is transported to a random location in time and space.
Yeah, we don't even know if it's the same universe, much less, you know. And I kind of figured that fairly quickly is when they figured out the tardigrade was the navigator of this system.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this is the weak link. This is the thing that's going to keep it from actually being a Star Trek canonical, every ship has it technology.
Yes. Yeah. And actually, I got to give the series its props for, I just like that it has raised public consciousness of tardigrades. Because when I saw the monster and I got my first clear look at it, I thought, hey, that looks like a giant tardigrade. And then guess what? It is a giant tardigrade. And I just love tardigrades. I think they're cool. For people who don't know, tardigrades are tiny microscopic animals that can survive almost anything. They're also known as water bears, and they can be frozen solid and yet live. And so they're just really cool, little, cute, microscopic animals. And I'm glad that more people know about them now.
And one of the things I really like about the spore drive as a plot device is that it requires that a human being be a human being be an essential part of the machine, and it introduces this moral question of is it right that we should use a person like they do and literally use them like a tool to operate this device.
Harm to the human being in the process.
Exactly.
And it involves genetic engineering, which is forbidden by Starfleet because of the Khan, Noonien, and Singh business.
Right. So I like it as that it raises these ethical questions as a plot device, and it's interesting, and apparently we'll have a key element of the second half of this first season. This introduces this, and the character at the heart of this. Let's talk about him and some of the problematic things that we might want to talk about. Stamets is the engineering officer who's got this bad attitude about stuff. He's sort of this prickly character.
Well, he's more than an engineering officer. He's the one who developed the drive in the first place. He was like one of two scientists who worked on this technology and figured out these spores and how they go through the universe and everything. His counterpart was on the other ship, the Glenn, that was destroyed.
So much has been made of the fact that Stamets is in a homosexual relationship with the ship's doctor, and that there has been the first on-screen kiss in a Star Trek series.
Between two men.
There have
been lots of kisses.
Right. Well, there was the one where the Trill had that moment.
The Trill meets her host.
Two females, but my point, there have been lots of kisses on Star Trek.
Right.
All the way back to Captain Kirk.
Right. So the first,
not just interracial ones.
Right.
Yeah.
There's been interspecies ones. So the first homosexual on-screen kiss. I don't know what to say about it. I mean, obviously, I'm uncomfortable with what the idea is that things have been normalized, that all of the moral qualms expressed in our society today toward homosexuality as a marriage and all these other things, that they have been overcome, and in the future everybody's okay with it and it's all fine. And to me, it just expresses the viewpoint of the sorts of people who make Hollywood productions.
Well, it's the mindset that, that the progressives, you'll hear this phrase, are on the right side of history.
Yeah.
That in the future, in the 23rd century or wherever this is, 24th century, whatever time frame that is, that, this is just a normal part of life. And what we're fighting now is just going to be fine in the future. And you know what? Again, that's a first of all, that's not studying history. That's absolutely, like we talked about in Orville with, like I said, with religious practices, it's not understanding history. There have been times that things...
It's also assuming history has a side and and that it's going to go positive. Actually, that's naive 19th century progressivism, which was then dealt huge blows by World War I and World War II and the Cold War.
But is rearing its ugly head again, it seems like.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's assuming, again, it's assuming that those of us who hold to traditional, quote unquote, traditional views of sexuality, would I'll just flat out say, Christian views of sexuality, that we're behind the times, that in the future we'll be the ones who will be on the outside, that our views will be seen as antiquated, that so on and so on.
So let me throw something out there. So we anyone who knows a bit about the history of Star Trek knows that Gene Roddenberry was a humanist at heart. He was not a religious believer.
He was pro-life.
He was pro-life, but he was not religious. It was agnostic at best. And had a humanist outlook. And so this is sort of at the root of Star Trek. And as Christians who have been Star Trek fans, like you, Jimmy, I've been a Star Trek fan since before I can remember any different. This is something we've had to live with. And frankly, if you're a Christian who consumes Hollywood content, it's pretty much the same way with a lot of things. So does this affect your enjoyment of the series? Can you watch it and be like, well, I don't really like that part, but I'm enjoying the rest of the series, or is this, because there'll be some people who say this makes it not watchable. How do you approach these things?
It certainly affects my enjoyment of the series because I don't enjoy the scenes where they're in this area. In terms of, does that mean I can't watch the series? Well, no, because any human production is going to contain flaws. And if you were to say, I'm never going to watch anything that has morally problematic content in it, well, okay, that would eliminate Shakespeare right off the bat. But in terms of depictions of morally problematic content, that would eliminate the Bible, because people sin in the Bible. A difference is that the Bible doesn't portray this as a normal, acceptable, good thing. It's very strong on the kind of we shouldn't be sinning message. But not all culture is that way. I mean, people make mistakes, and every writer, creator, artist, actor, whatever, is a sinner, and at some point that's going to be reflected in their work. So you don't write off something just because it contains morally problematic content or even approves of morally problematic content. You eliminate it when one of two things happens. Either the discomfort that morally problematic content causes you reaches such a level that you just want to write the whole thing off, or you get tempted to either endorse or engage in the morally problematic content. And so if you're not tempted by this, if you're not tempted to approve of this, and as long as there's enough other good stuff in the series, that this is a relatively lower order of things, given the amount of time they're spending on it, which is not a huge amount, then it's possible to go ahead and watch it, even though it's uncomfortable in those scenes. And frankly, I strongly wish they were not there.
Okay. I think that's a good approach. I think that's a well-balanced approach, and to not just Star Trek, but to any of the content that's out there. So let's turn to something a little lighter. There are some elements that they draw in from classic Trek. We've talked about Sarek. We've talked about Harry Mudd. What do you think of Harry Mudd, his appearance in 2 episodes so far of this series, one in which he played a major role?
He's more psychopathic than he was in the original series, but I really enjoyed his presence.
Oh, yeah, I did too. Father Cory, how did you... How do you feel about the actor?
He plays it very interesting, doesn't it? I mean, it's unfortunately, like I said, I haven't watched as much of the original series to really get a good feel for the character initially. So
you can't really from the original series. His appearance is so small. And by the way,
he's in 2 episodes.
Yeah. Rainn Wilson from The Office plays Harry Mudd in this. In case you don't know.
I think he's very. There's a humor to his character that's very dark, but he's very much you can see someone who's a profiteer being this character, and then getting upset enough to do the whole thing with the time shift, right. So, I think he plays the character that he's setting out to play very well. Again, whether or not he compares as Harry Mudd, I don't know, but
I liked the sort of the amoral Mudd, who's he's disturbing. His amorality is disturbing on itself. But yet there's a sort of piratical way about him that's sort of fun.
Yeah. He's a swashbuckling, shady character. He's kind of like he's sort of in the mold of Han Solo, but more comedic and more overweight.
And a little bit more less concerned about the hurting others. Although I think some of Harry Mudd's lack of concern for the pain of others has to do with the fact that he knew that time would reset and it would wipe out his actions. Which, although from a moral perspective, that's still from our perspective morally, they still bear moral weight.
Yeah. And that's, I think, because that's the big difference between the Harry Mudd here and the Harry Mudd we see in 10 years' time on The Next Generation. This is Harry Mudd gone psychopath in that episode. And frankly, the ending of it, even though they tie it into his wife that we see an android version of in the original series, and we learn he's got an unhappy home life, and they kind of fill in that backstory. I found the ending of that episode where he goes off with his wife and that's his punishment. It's like, no, you go to jail forever after you've done this.
Yeah. I found that very unbelievable. That was hard to buy. I agree with that. So I want to kind of wrap up because we've been talking for a while here, but I want to wrap up with some of the rumors about what's going on in the series. And one of the rumors involves Lieutenant Tyler, Ash Tyler, who Lorca encounters when they're both imprisoned on a Klingon ship. And Tyler says he's been imprisoned for 7 months, and they escape together.
Nobody survives 7 months on a Klingon as a Klingon prisoner, he points out.
Exactly. And so he ends up on Discovery as the security chief. And Jimmy, you mentioned that there's some theories out there about maybe Ash Tyler isn't all he. And let's say if you don't want to hear spoiler theories right now, I would end the podcast here.
Don't listen to this part because we're about to hit a big potential spoiler.
Right. So if you don't want to hear that sort of spoiler theories, thank you for listening and subscribe and go to Tridio.com to find out more. For everyone else, we'll continue talking about it.
Okay, so like normally fan theories aren't worth the time of day. I mean, there's just tons of, you go on YouTube and there's tons of fan theories about Star Trek and Star Wars and who is really who and all kinds of stuff. And 99% of it is garbage and turns out not to be true. But this fan theory, as well as another one we'll also mention, actually has a pretty solid basis. Early on in Star Trek Discovery, we meet a Klingon albino character named Vok. And he is kind of the chief acolyte of T'Kuvma. He's his torchbearer. And then, after T'Kuvma is killed, he kind of carries on. And the last we see of him is when the Klingon lady, whose name I don't know, is sending him off to a secretive place where some kind of Klingon matriarchs will give him the key to victory. And in order to have victory, he's going to need to sacrifice everything. Mm-hmm. And then we see nothing.
Her name was
L'Rell. And then after that, we see nothing of this character for episodes. Yeah. Then you have Ash Tyler show up in Klingon custody under the care of, or custody rather, of L'Rell. And he explains his mysterious survival for 7 months as being because she's taken a quote-unquote special interest in him, implying he's not only been her torture victim, but her sexual plaything. And so then Ash Tyler proves his worth and gets taken aboard Discovery and improbably is appointed security chief. But then that's one of many bad decisions, or, criminally unjustifiable decisions of Captain Lorca. And then fans noticed something very interesting. The actor who plays Ash Tyler was originally announced as playing a Klingon character. And then it got changed to human. Also, the actor, if you go to IMDb and look up the actor who's credited as playing Vok, it is an actor who, unlike every other actor on IMDb who wants their face out there, does not have a picture of himself. It's only a picture of him in the Vok makeup. And this actor, despite starring in a major science fiction franchise, has no previous acting credits at all. And so this has led a lot of fans to propose that Vok is Ash Tyler, or Ash Tyler is Vok in disguise. We have previous examples from both Star Trek, the original series, and Star Trek Star Trek Deep Space Nine, of Klingons being transformed to pass as human, as spies. And this would jibe with the claim that in order to achieve victory, Vok is going to need to sacrifice everything when he meets these matriarchs. And it also would jibe with Ash's mysterious backstory and rise to power. And there's even some people started looking into the name of the actor that supposedly played Vok. His name was
Javid Iqbal.
Yeah, Javid Iqbal. So if you translate those words from Persian, the Farsi language, Javid is apparently derived from the Persian word for eternal, and Iqbal is derived from the Persian word for luck. And some people have suggested that eternal luck is a Persian way of saying live long and prosper. So, the whole existence of the actor who played Vok is suspicious. And in the most recent episode, the mid-season finale, we have Laurel and Ash Tyler confronting each other. Ash Tyler has all of these flashbacks to some kind of surgery or torture, which could be part of his transformation. And Laurel tells him privately, I won't let them hurt you, and soon.
So the idea is, and so Tyler says that Laurel had used him sexually as a prisoner and as a toy, and then we get the scene of them together. We see the flashbacks of him under medical, we're supposed to think it's torture, but maybe it's this the reconstructive surgery, and that he doesn't really remember, although he's having these flashbacks. And maybe the idea is that Vok had some sort of memory wipe done.
To make him a better spy.
To make him so that he's more of a mole ready to be activated at some point, some Manchurian candidate sort of insider, and that Laurel, it's implied that maybe she let herself get captured and taken to Discovery so that she could be there to activate him.
Actually, she grabs Ash in the beam out moment specifically to go with him.
Right, exactly.
It seems.
And then one of the other aspects, what was I going to... There was another aspect of it that I was going to point... Oh, so Lorca has in his office, we've seen, Captain Lorca, a tribble on his desk. And we know from Star Trek lore, from the original series, the original episode, in fact, with Harry Mudd, that tribbles do not like Klingons and become very agitated in their presence. And we have never seen Lieutenant Tyler in Lorca's office yet, where the tribble lives.
Oh, that'll be interesting.
So there's I never caught that. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this question: will this be part of the reveal? And it's an interesting plot device if true, because then it means that there is this burgeoning relationship between Tyler and Burnham. And
it's her first romantic relationship ever because of her Vulcan upbringing.
Right. Yep. Exactly. And so this is an interesting question of will this be the eventual reveal of Vok being this, and it has
and the next question is, will his original identity reassert itself fully, or will he want to side with the humans after this is all over? Which is by far the more interesting dramatic choice.
In fact, we've seen this occur in other movies and stories where the undercover character
goes native.
Yeah, the Schwarzenegger movie where he goes to Mars.
Total Recall?
Total Recall, where the idea is, and it's a little less developed, it's not certain that this is the case, but the idea is he went undercover, got his memory wiped, and then kind of, like you say, went native and didn't really want to go back to being who he was, and there's this conflict ultimately, and so maybe that's going to be at the root here. So that's the first theory. Jimmy, there was a second theory that I hadn't heard before.
Yeah. The second one that also seems to have some substance to it, and this is not as big a reveal, but it looks like one of the things they've been seeding next generation or original series characters in this show, like Harry Mudd. And recently we had a mention of a Decker that may be an early version of Commodore Decker. But it looks like they may have introduced another character that we've actually seen before, but not under this name. In the original series episode, The Dagger of the Mind, there is a woman on a psychiatric penal colony that tortures Jim Kirk with a psychic device, and her name is Lethe, and she's a psychiatrist, and she's committed some kind of horrible crime or something in the past that led to her being a patient in this mental facility. And when Kirk asks her what she did, she says, it doesn't matter, that person no longer exists anymore. And her name is Lethe. Lethe is the name of the Greek mythological river that you drink that causes forgetfulness. And so Lethe is a symbol of forgetfulness. Well, in Star Trek Discovery, we've had an episode called Lethe, and that episode focuses heavily on Admiral, what's her name?
Cornwell.
It's not Cartwright. Cornwell. Admiral Cornwell, who, guess what, is a psychiatrist and a dead ringer for the character Lethe. She looks like her. She's got the same hairstyle. Obviously, the actress is different, but it looks like they are very possibly setting up Admiral Cornwell to be the Lethe in the psychiatric institution that Kirk meets in 10 years' time. And I when I first saw that, I thought, wow, that actually is very plausible given all the stuff they've dropped here. I mean, the name, the psychiatrist, the name of the episode, all of that fits into this. I thought that it might have been wrong when L'Rell apparently killed Admiral Cornwell, but then it turns out she was not killed after all. So now she's back. Mm-hmm. And so I have some hope that they may pay this one off.
That'll be another interesting aspect of to see if Cornwell is now aboard Discovery wherever it is now, and there'll be this conflict between her and Lorca, certainly, given that the last time we saw her, she had been trying to take away his command, and he set her up to be captured and possibly killed by the Klingons.
And if she is Lethe, it means we're probably almost certainly going to get to see whatever terrible thing that she did that led her to be confined in a mental institution.
Right. Or, whatever happens to her that creates this impression, whatever Lorca manages to do to her, that it gets her confined. So there's that possibility. So a couple interesting theories. I don't know. I haven't really looked to see what rumors are out there about what the next half season of Star Trek Discovery holds. I'm enjoying it. I like it, despite whatever reservations I may have expressed. I look forward to it, and I watch it every week. I do enjoy the show, and I hope it develops further. We have a second season coming after this first full season. In fact, I think the first full season is going to be how many episodes? I think
it's 15 episodes for the season.
Yeah.
So that would mean we've got 6 episodes coming back because this was the 9th.
Yes.
Yeah, and it starts up again in January, just after New Year's, weekend after New Year's.
Okay. Incidentally, someone mentioned, I was watching a video reviewing the most recent episode, and somebody mentioned that this series pays off if you pay close attention to detail, that it not expects, but it rewards viewer engagement. And an example of that is the cliffhanger of the final episode, because they use the spore drive to go home, and suddenly they're in this mysterious place. We don't know where, maybe not even the same universe, because we know the mirror universe is coming up somehow. But there's a moment you blink and you miss it, and you really need to freeze frame this moment to see it clearly. But just before they use the spore drive, Lorca inputs some data on his keypad, and it's got a list of the spore jumps, and right at the bottom it says Lorca override. So just before they jumped, he deliberately changed the coordinates as part of his ongoing pattern of manipulation. And he said, take us home. So wherever they are may be home for him.
It's an interesting idea. The idea is that it pays off close watching. I mean, this has been sort of a thing that's come up with new series, whether it's Westworld or some of the others, where it's in the small details that you really find something, you really get an insight into the show. And I think that it lends itself to this idea that the fans today, shows are made for several different levels, and you have the casual fans, but then they sort of make a show that rewards the intense fan as well, and so there's different levels of enjoyment. So that's good to know. So I think I think that's all we have to say about Star Trek Discovery, at least for the first half of the first season. That'll be it from us. So what did you think of Star Trek Discovery's first half season? Let us know by visiting Trideo.com, TRIDEO.com, or the Trideo Facebook page, and leave us some feedback. You can find links to all our personal social media and our websites on our show notes on Trideo.com. And make sure you subscribe to our podcast feed to ensure you receive all the future installments of the Secrets of podcast series, which this is part of, including our upcoming look at the Star Wars The Last Jedi, which comes out next month. We'll get together to talk about that when it comes out. Until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for sharing in the secrets of Star Trek Discovery.
I've enjoyed the Discovery.
And Father Cory Sticha, thank you as well.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thank you, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening.